So sometimes it is. Sometimes that's all there is. The bully is so afraid of getting in trouble that all they do is send an anonymous email. But more often, that is a student who's also being bullied in school. They may be being bullied right, in the classroom in much more subtle ways. And those trainings that we talked about that are coming with the implementation period are going to help us to identify what are those subtle ways so that we can identify the bullying that's happening that is in our control. Unfortunately, studies have shown that the number one way to stop cyberbullying, actually the most effective way to stop cyberbullying, is to limit or eliminate the bully's access to the internet. I mean, that sounds really obvious. They've done studies, though of course there's always professors who are willing to do a study. And unfortunately, that's not something that educators or that lawyers at the NYCLU have any control over. We can't make parents make their students turn off the internet. We can't make parents take the cell phone away from the student. But what we can do is look for those things that sort of come out of the sort of black hole of cyberbullying and come into our classrooms and affect the way that we do our daily business in school. And then the last thing, it's not necessarily worse than other bullying. Again, I think the media really fuels an idea that somehow if there's a fight at school because kids send a text message to each other, that is somehow worse than a fight that happened because kids send a note to each other. It may be worse if there's more people joining, but that would be worse anyway, right? If there's more people joining, that's something that, again, we as educators have the tools to address those kinds of fights, whether there's 10 people or 100 people. That's something we've been dealing with for the entire history of public schools. If someone's in a fight at school, it's not necessarily worse because it started online. I say not necessarily because there are studies that show that psychological damage from cyberbullying can be longer lasting for young people, especially when it's targeted at one student, especially when it's coming from an anonymous source. It can cause a lot of fear. So I say necessarily because I want to make sure that there is a difference here, that the ability of online communications to really be in a student's life can make it worse than traditional bullying. Did you want to ask a question?
I wanted to
Sure.
share one thing I heard at a training I attended. Delete,
Right.
meaning for the students themselves. If they're reading this, they don't have to respond. Instantly hit
Right.
delete and it's gone.
Yeah.
It's over.
Did
It doesn't
everybody hear
continue.
that? She's saying delete, training the students to delete, to not pass these things on. And I think the bystander concept is something that's been really powerful in anti-bullying training. If a bystander intervenes in a bullying situation, that bullying situation will end within 15 seconds, 57% of the time. Bystanders are incredibly powerful in bullying situations, incredibly, much more than they know, particularly where students may fear the bully even if they're not the target of the bully. Students are incredibly powerful as bystanders. And the concept of an online bystander is something that we should start thinking about, right? What is your role as an online bystander? Can this end with you? Can you, tip someone off or
Even
let them
text,
know?
everything.
Delete everything, not pass these things on, not forward these messages, unfriend people. These are strategies that young people can use to help to create that climate that we want to create in our schools of a place where bullying is just not tolerated. I do want to make one other point, which is not on a slide, about the Dignity Bill, which is there is a provision in the Dignity Bill that says that all of our policies that we're writing to implement this bill should be written with an eye towards intervention and rehabilitation of both targets and victims of targets and bullies. So zero tolerance, suspensions, and pushing kids out of school is not a proven effective tool for dealing with this kind of thing. And the writers of the Dignity Bill really took that into account when they wrote this bill, and they're putting that message out there in the law that says we're hoping that school districts will really take into account the power of interventions and counseling to end this kind of behavior. Yeah.
Okay, see, that's what I'm having a hard time understanding with this lecture. All right, I'm not an educator. All right, and I'm not here as a parent. Okay, the organization that I'm working with, I'm looking for bullies. All right, I encourage bullies to come in. All right, that's what I work with. I'm trying to stop killers from killing. But is this point of the lecture, is the Dignity Bill yet another provision in the law that's using to lock these bullies up? Because if it is, I need to
That's a great
tell
question.
these bullies that I know that.
This is
that
a
what
terrific
one
question.
of this is?
That is not the point of this. The drafters of this bill were very aware of the problem of, you probably have heard the term school to prison pipeline, the problems that young people face when their behavior and their misjudgment that young people typically exercise is treated only through the criminal justice system, right? So locking kids up. The police officer spoke earlier about, like, we don't want to take these cases of 14-year-olds sending nasty text messages. It's not what we want to do. We do not want to put more young people into situations that are just increase their isolation, increase their frustration with the system, and don't help them to build those kind of connections that are going to allow them to make the climate that we want them to make. One of the most effective ways to stop bullying in schools, and this has been shown in several studies, is by working with students to allow them to have a voice in what the anti-bullying rules are. That if they feel like this is a student-generated project, if this is something where their viewpoint is taken into consideration and rules that they made, that they decided on, that they're much more willing and much more apt to follow those rules, and that it helps them to learn from those rules. Why do we have this rule? I think, again, I'm so glad I sat in on the earlier presentation, because his slide about the brain development and how, you know, our brains don't stop developing until we're in our earlier mid-20s. Hopefully it's not mid, because then I'm probably not qualified. But early 20s, that is really true, and we don't want students, every time they make a mistake, to have whatever ties they have to their school community, to their peers, to adults they trust, severed as a result of that mistake. We want those ties to be increased. We want to pull that kid back into the school. We want to pull that back into a climate where they can feel comfortable, where they can talk to adults about their problems instead of passing on their anger, their frustration to other children. Yeah.
Will this PowerPoint presentation be posted on the Invite News website? Or can it be?
Sure. That's actually a good idea. I'm sure my communications director will like that. But if you can always email me, my email's about to come up on the next thing, and you can email me.
You said there's studies that prove that if youth have an opportunity to be a part of the
Right.
solution process, that they become more receptive to it.
Right.
Have
Particularly,
20 vacancies and only one youth, and in your working groups, it's only open to educators and parents.
no, the working groups are open to anyone, absolutely anyone, and we are very much seeking input of young people. And the seat on the task force is, when we say one youth, what we're really looking for is one youth organization where there's one seat, but that really means, you know, one person, his name is on the list, but that hopefully there's a network of young people that are working together with that youth is able to speak on behalf of a group or a network. So we're really looking for a lot of input from young people. We've had a lot of success with this in the city, working with young people and having just amazing young people working with lawmakers to get this stuff done, and we're really hoping to replicate that. So it looked like one seat, but the working groups are definitely open to young people, parents, educators, anyone, community members, academics, absolutely anyone. And that seat on the working group is we imagine that's probably going to be a rotating seat among some youth groups to get input from different folks. I do want to talk, while we're talking about the student input into the rules, some of you have the report. Could you just hold that up for a second? Sorry, I don't have one up here. So this report, Safety with Dignity, we came out with this report a couple years ago along with the Annenberg Institute and an organization called Make the Road New York. That's a case study of 5 schools in New York City. It's not in the packets, and I don't have enough for everyone, but they are on our website. There's a PDF copy that you can download on nyclu.org. And in our case study, we talk about schools that are implementing the kind of safe school policies that that the Dignity Act is supposed to be carrying on. So this sort of, how do you create a network? How do you involve students? How do you pull vulnerable, at-risk, or bullying students into that fold, make them feel like they're part of a community? It's a case study of schools and principals. Several of them do this youth input every year when they revise their code of conduct. They ask for youth input, and they work on areas where the young people, and it's amazing how they'll rise to the occasion. I'm sure you've all had that experience. You know, where they really will sometimes come up with rules that are much more strict than anything we would put on them to police each other. And if they believe in that rule and they feel ownership over that rule, then that's sometimes the best thing we can do. So this is what can districts do now. Again, it sounds like maybe you're on top of a lot of this stuff already, but while you don't have to wait for the 2-year thing, if you have the capability and the resources now to designate your anti-bullying coordinator, we recommend that in some cases could be doubled up with the Title IX coordinator who's already in the school and has received a lot of similar training. Create and publicize a confidential complaint mechanism. A really easy way to do this is to put a form on your website where people can submit a confidential complaint. An even easier way is to put a box in your lunchroom where people can drop a complaint, where young people can let you know what's happening and you can monitor. And I also list some anti-bullying resources. I think all of these are listed in your packet, but these are all free resources. GLSEN makes a lot of their trainings available for free in their materials, and the USDOE just launched bullyinginfo.org, which is probably going to get better over the next few months. There's not a lot of content on it right now, but I think it's helpful.